There's a peculiar hush that hangs over the town of Alder Ridge, one that seems to deepen the moment Evelyn Parker's old pickup rumbled down the sycamore-lined street, trailer in tow, just as dusk began to paint the horizon in streaks of burnt orange and lavender. The windows of the Victorian house at the end of Willow Lane glimmered with the last rays of light, the glass dulled by years of dust and neglect. If houses could shiver, this one did. Locals called it the cursed house, and even the wild deer gave the overgrown yard a wide berth. Evelyn pressed her palm against the steering wheel, letting the engine idle a moment longer than necessary. She was in her early 40s, tall and spare, her hair cropped close for convenience, face marked by sun and worry. She'd been a firefighter once, until fate and a wall of flame left her a widow and early retiree with scars that never quite healed. It was only her and Silver now, a Mustang mare with a silver mane and wary eyes, rescued from the same wildfire that ended Evelyn's career and upended her life. They'd come north looking for a quieter place to heal, far from the choking memories of smoke and sirens. Evelyn believed, or tried to believe, that a fresh start could grow from the ashen remains of everything she'd lost. But as she sat in the truck, the weight of the town's stairs pressing against her windows, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. Silver shifted in the trailer, restless from the drive. Evelyn spoke softly over her shoulder. "We're here, girl. This is it. Just us now." She unclipped her seatbelt, the sound too loud in the stillness, and stepped out onto the gravel drive. The house loomed over her, 3 stories of peeling paint and gabled windows, porch sagging like a weary sigh. The air smelled of loam, rain, and old secrets. From behind curtains and through cracked doorways, townsfolk watched, whispering to each other about the newcomer and her odd wild horse. Evelyn unloaded Silver herself, guiding the Mustang into the small barn behind the house. The mare's coat shimmered in the fading light, but she danced nervously at the end of the lead rope, ears flicking back and forth. The barn was serviceable but worn, its beams dark with age, its stalls thick with the scent of hay and dust. Evelyn spoke in quiet tones as she brushed Silver down, trying to pass calm through her hands, but Silver kept snorting, eyes wide, hooves thudding restlessly against the old floorboards. Night fell quickly. In the kitchen, Evelyn set a single place at the table and listened to the creaks and sighs of the house settling around her, wind moving through unseen cracks, branches scraping against the roof. The loneliness pressed in from every wall, worse than any fireground silence somehow. She unpacked a battered photograph of her late husband, placing it by the sink, and tried not to think about all the things she'd had to leave behind. The first sign that something was wrong came as Evelyn was drifting off to sleep. Lying on a cot by an upstairs window, she was pulled awake by a sound that didn't belong, a low, rhythmic humming, almost mechanical, coming from beneath the floorboards. She sat up, heart thumping, straining to listen. The hum grew louder for a moment, then faded, only to return in a deeper tone, vibrating through the old house. Somewhere in the night, Silver let out a sharp, high-pitched whinny. The barn was only 30 yards from the house, but in that moment, it felt a world away. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight and hurried downstairs, her bare feet cold on the warped wood. Out on the porch, the night was thick and moonless, clouds swallowing the stars. The barn loomed as a silhouette against the darkness. She called Silver's name, voice trembling despite her best effort. From inside, she heard the mare stomping and pawing at her stall, a panic that set Evelyn's nerves on edge. She entered the barn slowly, talking all the while, hands stretched out so Silver could see her coming. Silver's sides were heaving, her eyes rolling white. She wouldn't settle, not even when Evelyn stroked her mane and whispered the old calming phrases. Instead, she kept swinging her head toward the far end of the barn, nostrils flared, tail lashing. The humming had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Evelyn listened, nothing but the sound of her own breathing and Silver's frantic movement. She walked the length of the barn, shining her light over every beam and board. There was no sign of rats or raccoons, nothing to explain the noise or Silver's agitation. Back inside the house, sleep was impossible. Evelyn lay awake, listening for that hum, watching the shadows crawl along the walls. At some point, she realized she was holding her breath, afraid to move, as if the house itself was waiting for her to leave. By dawn, exhaustion won out. She rose, stiff and unsteady, to find Silver standing quietly in her stall, but with a wariness that hadn't been there before. The town was already awake, a pair of teenagers lingering by the gate, pointing at the barn and laughing behind their hands. Evelyn ignored them, focusing on Silver, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Something about this house, this land, felt unsettled, and though she tried to dismiss it as nerves or the after-effects of too many sleepless nights, Evelyn couldn't shake the sense that her troubles and the secrets of the old Victorian had only just begun. The days in Alder Ridge were marked by a steady drizzle and the sharp scent of pine. For Evelyn, each morning began with routines that should have been comforting. Coffee in a chipped mug, oats for Silver, a cautious walk through the overgrown orchard behind the house. Yet, even as she tried to create normalcy, the unease from her first night never truly faded. The house stood silent and watchful, its every creak and shudder reminding her that she was an outsider here. In town, whispers seemed to follow her wherever she went. The first time she stopped at the hardware store for lumber and sealant, a bell rang as she entered, and every head turned her way. Folks were polite enough. Some even forced a tight-lipped smile, but conversation quieted as soon as she reached for a can of paint or asked directions to the feed store. They spoke of her as the widow up on Willow Lane and said even less about Silver, the Mustang with the haunted eyes. When Evelyn overheard one shopkeeper mutter that no good ever came from the old house, she pretended not to notice and finished her shopping in silence. At home, Silver was a puzzle. The mare was normally steady, but in Alder Ridge she seemed on edge, pacing her stall, ears flicking at sounds Evelyn couldn't hear. Evelyn spent hours brushing her down, crooning softly, but Silver's muscles remained tense. There was a moment one afternoon when Silver stood perfectly still, staring at the orchard as if she could see something beyond the tangled blackberry brambles, a presence Evelyn could neither sense nor name. It left her unsettled, and she tried to dismiss it as nerves. Yet when she walked the orchard's edge, boots squelching in the sodden ground, the feeling persisted that the land itself was wary, holding its breath. Sometimes, late at night, the house seemed to come alive. There were tremors that rattled glass in the cabinets and sent dust motes swirling through the moonlit air. Once, as rain pounded the roof, Evelyn noticed damp spots spreading across the kitchen ceiling, patterns that seemed to form and reform in the shape of grasping hands. Floorboards groaned under her steps, and the air in the hallway grew thick with a musty chill. She tried to blame the weather, the age of the house, but a memory gnawed at her. How, when fire swept through her old home, the smoke felt almost sentient, like it was searching for something to consume. That same searching presence lingered here. Silver's unease grew with each passing day. She refused to graze in the orchard, snorting and pawing at the earth as if something beneath the surface disturbed her. She was restless in storms, eyes wide and nostrils flaring, pacing her stall long after midnight. The bond between woman and horse, forged in crisis, was the only constant. Evelyn remembered the night she found Silver, trapped at the edge of a wildfire in the Sierras, her own skin burning from the heat, the roar of flames like a monster at her back. Silver's mane was singed, her flanks streaked with soot, but she had fought to survive, kicking free of a tangled wire fence as embers rained down. That night, Evelyn had promised never to leave Silver behind, and the Mustang had clung to her ever since, following her across hundreds of lonely miles. Now both bore scars that set them apart. Evelyn kept her sleeves rolled down to hide the marks along her forearms. Silver shied from the touch of strangers, head held high and proud. In Alder Ridge, difference was its own kind of curse. As days slipped into weeks, the house's problems worsened. The damp on the walls grew, spreading into the corners of every room. Unexplained creaking came from above the attic, sometimes followed by soft thuds as if footsteps paced the floor. Evelyn tried to repair what she could, hammering loose boards back into place, but every fix seemed to reveal another flaw. Pipes groaned, faucets spat brown water, and the cellar filled with a chill that never quite faded, even on warm afternoons. The townspeople, sensing her struggle, grew bolder in their avoidance. Children dared each other to run up her porch steps and ring the bell, fleeing in shrieks when Evelyn answered. On one occasion, she found a wreath of dried garlic and wild sage tied to her gate, a warning or perhaps an offering. She left it hanging, unsure of its intent. Only Silver remained steadfast, though her anxiety never eased. The horse's distress reached its peak during a violent thunderstorm, when a flash of lightning split the sky and the barn doors rattled on their hinges. Evelyn rushed out, rain lashing her face, to find Silver kicking at her stall door, wild-eyed and sweating. It took nearly an hour to calm her, the storm's fury mirrored in both their hearts. That night, exhausted and aching, Evelyn sat on the kitchen floor, back pressed to the old iron stove. The wind howled down the chimney, and the whole house seemed to tremble. She closed her eyes and tried to summon the strength she once found on the fire line, that sense of purpose and belonging. But in Alder Ridge, surrounded by strangers and secrets, she felt more alone than ever. Somewhere outside, Silver whinnied into the darkness, her call echoing through the orchard and the silent, watching town. The morning after the worst of the storms, the orchard glistened with rainwater, every leaf shimmering in the fragile sunlight. Evelyn stepped out with Silver, intent on shaking off the residue of another sleepless night. Her boots squelched through mud as she led Silver out to graze, hoping that the return of daylight would ease the unease in the mare's posture. But Silver, muscles taut, seemed intent on something only she could sense. She circled a particular spot near the oldest apple tree, sniffing the earth, pawing at the sodden ground. Every time Evelyn tried to lead her away, Silver returned to that patch, stamping her hoof with growing urgency. At first, Evelyn dismissed the behavior as leftover anxiety from the storm, but it was impossible to ignore the fixated way Silver worked, nose to the ground, ears pinned back. When Evelyn knelt and pressed her hand to the soil, she felt a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, like a current running beneath the orchard. She stood, wiping her hand on her jeans, a prickle of curiosity running up her spine. Inside, the odd noises in the house seemed to multiply. In the small study off the main hallway, the old wallpaper peeled in strips, and one wall bore a jagged crack that grew wider each week. Silver began pacing the fence outside the study's window, drawing Evelyn's gaze toward the spot time and again. The Mustang's instincts, so finely tuned to hidden danger, refused to be ignored. Evelyn's practical mind, honed by years of emergency work, wouldn't let go of the puzzle. The symptoms were too many to be written off as mere bad luck: tremors in the orchard, cracks in the walls, those humming vibrations at night. There was a pattern here, something beneath the surface. She found herself researching late into the night, combing through online forums about old Victorian houses and strange happenings, subsidence, sinkholes, the stories of Alder Ridge's early settlers. None of it brought real answers, only more questions. One afternoon, as she was patching a section of gutter, a battered blue pickup rumbled up the drive. Joe Williams, the local handyman, hopped out with a wave. He was in his late 50s, with a sunburned face, bushy white mustache, and an easy gait. Joe had a reputation in town for knowing every house's secrets and a habit of telling ghost stories with a wink. He leaned against the porch railing, surveying the property with a practiced eye. Evelyn showed him the worst of the damage: the deepening cracks, the persistent damp, the tremors in the orchard. Joe listened, nodding, then knelt by the old apple tree where Silver had been pawing. He pressed his ear to the ground, grunted, and stood. "You might be better off leaving old ghosts alone," he said, not quite joking. "Houses like this, they remember things. Sometimes it's best not to poke at what's underneath." Despite his warning, Joe agreed to take a look at the foundation and the barn. As they walked, Silver trailed behind, never letting either of them stray too far from the cracked study wall. During their inspection, a brief summer storm rolled over the hills, lightning flickering in the distance. The hum beneath the house returned, rising in pitch until the entire structure seemed to vibrate like a struck bell. Silver's agitation peaked. She whinnied, circling the yard, head low and muscles shuddering. Joe watched the mare's behavior, his expression thoughtful. "That horse of yours, she's smart," he said. "Animals know things before we do." He made a few notes, promised to check town records for anything unusual about the land, and left with a shake of his head, muttering about restless spirits and buried secrets. That evening, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, flipping through the house's blueprints she'd found buried in a dusty drawer. She traced her finger over the lines of the orchard, the barn, the main house. Something didn't add up. An odd angle here, a wall that looked thicker than it ought to be, an empty space where there shouldn't be one. The pieces refused to fit together. With each passing day, Silver's behavior became more urgent. She pawed at the orchard by dawn, refused to settle in the barn at dusk, and pressed her nose against the cracked study wall whenever Evelyn worked there. The thunderstorms returned in fits and starts, and with every flash of lightning, the strange hum reverberated through the walls, rattling windows and nerves alike. Unable to sleep, Evelyn spent her nights pacing the house, flashlight in hand, listening for the source of the vibrations. The cellar was cold and empty, the attic crowded with forgotten trunks and mildew. The only clue lay in Silver's persistence, her refusal to leave the side of the cracked wall in the study. Evelyn began to trust the Mustang's instincts more than her own. The pattern of oddities pointed not to a haunting, but to something hidden, something that tied the old house, the restless land, and the town's silence together. She wondered what secrets Alder Ridge had buried beneath its tranquil facade, and whether she and Silver were strong enough to unearth them. By the end of the week, a fresh crack appeared in the study, jagged and raw. Silver whinnied as thunder rolled over the ridge, hooves stamping out a warning. Evelyn pressed her palm to the trembling wall and made a silent promise. She would follow the evidence wherever it led, no matter how deep it went. The storm outside intensified, and as the house shuddered, Evelyn felt a strange certainty settle in her bones. The mystery was no longer just a nuisance. It was a call to action. Something was waiting to be found, and she was no longer afraid to search for it. A week of uneasy weather settled over Alder Ridge, and the soil in the orchard grew softer by the day, swelling with each new rainfall. Evelyn moved through her daily routines with an edge of anticipation. The subtle tremors in the ground and Silver's persistent agitation no longer felt random. They hinted at a pattern, and every instinct in Evelyn's body pushed her to unravel it. Each morning, Evelyn watched Silver closely as the mare circled the same patch of earth beneath the old apple tree, nostrils flaring, hooves digging into the loam. Sometimes Silver would freeze, neck arched, ears pinned as if she could hear something far beneath the surface. Evelyn knelt there after the rain one dawn, pressing her palm to the sodden ground. A cool shiver ran up her arm, not cold, but vibrational, the sense of something alive and moving deep below. That afternoon, Joe arrived, toolbox in hand, ready to help investigate. The old handyman studied the orchard's uneven ground, his boots sinking into the mud as he crouched beside Evelyn. Silver lingered close, watchful and restless. Together, Evelyn and Joe probed the soil with metal rods and a shovel, following the faint tremors that seemed to pulse in waves. The digging was slow and heavy. Each shovelful revealed earth that was unusually dark and waterlogged. As they reached a depth of about 2 feet, the ground caved suddenly, and a rush of cold water soaked their boots. Startled, they stepped back as a thin, steady stream trickled out of the opening, carrying with it bits of silt and the sharp smell of minerals. Joe dug further along the trench, and soon the outline of a narrow underground waterway emerged. A stream hidden just beneath the orchard, winding directly beneath the foundation of the house. The current was weak but constant, and as the muddy water pooled at their feet, the whole situation clicked together in Evelyn's mind. The trembling at night, the spreading damp, the uneasy vibrations. This stream was the secret heart of all the strangeness. For a long moment, Evelyn and Joe stood in silence, letting the significance settle. Water, relentless and patient, could undermine even the strongest stone. No wonder the old Victorian felt haunted. Its bones had been shifting for years, Joe nodded, confirming Evelyn's suspicions. This here's been eating away at your foundation for decades. The weight of all that water under the house. No wonder it creaks and shakes. He set about clearing the trench and rigging up a makeshift channel to divert the stream away from the house's base. Evelyn threw herself into the work, grateful for a problem she could face with her hands. They labored through the rest of the afternoon, muddy and determined, coaxing the water into a safe route that led downhill toward the far edge of the property. Silver hovered on the outskirts of their efforts, visibly calmer now, occasionally dipping her nose to the fresh flow as if sensing relief. As twilight fell, the orchard seemed to exhale. The ever-present hum faded, replaced by a hush that felt natural, more like the old rhythms of land and wind than a warning of something wrong. Inside, Evelyn checked the house. The walls were still damp, the cracks still visible, but there was a new stillness, as if the place itself was resting for the first time in years. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, yet not all questions were answered. Though Silver's anxiety eased, she still eyed the house's study warily, sidestepping near the cracked wall whenever Evelyn passed by. The mystery had shifted, but not disappeared. Even Joe, after packing up his tools, paused at the door to remark that there were always more secrets beneath old properties than anyone wanted to admit. Evelyn spent the evening in the barn, brushing Silver and reflecting on everything they'd unearthed, literally and figuratively. She recognized a kinship between the Mustang's stubborn loyalty and the hidden persistence of the stream. Both had endured in silence, waiting for someone to notice, to dig deeper. The victory felt incomplete, though, and in the quiet hours after dark, Evelyn found her thoughts circling back to that bricked-up wall and the persistent sense that the house's deepest story was still locked away. The next morning, Evelyn woke to a rare, clear sunrise. The orchard sparkled with dew, and Silver stood relaxed, sides rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke of peace. Evelyn stepped outside, stretching, feeling the smallest seed of hope begin to take root. For the first time since arriving in Alder Ridge, she believed she and Silver might have a chance to settle in, to heal. Yet the house still whispered of unfinished business, and Evelyn knew she would have to follow its secrets wherever they led. Alder Ridge, for all its superstitions and silence, was not done with her yet. The sun brought a brief calm to Alder Ridge, but inside the old Victorian house, Evelyn sensed another tension tightening. The orchard, finally drained of its restless hum, stood peaceful, and Silver settled into a gentle routine. Yet the house itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to be found. Silver, though calmer than before, began to exhibit a new pattern. Whenever Evelyn entered the study, a small, book-lined room at the back of the house, the Mustang would stop whatever she was doing outside and trot up to the window, peering in with intent, dark eyes. When the study door was left open, Silver paced the yard just beyond, circling, stamping, never straying far from the cracked wall. If Evelyn knelt to examine the jagged seam in the plaster, Silver would whinny, ears pitched forward, as if urging her on. One afternoon, Evelyn lingered in the study longer than usual. The light from the orchard cast shifting patterns on the faded rug. She trailed her fingers along the fracture in the wall, noting its unnatural width, the coldness radiating from it even in the warmth of spring. The house's blueprints, which she'd left unrolled across the desk, caught her eye. She studied them again, searching for what had been gnawing at her mind since the day Joe had helped her uncover the underground stream. Every line, every shadow on the blueprint seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. On a hunch, she measured the study's dimensions, counting her paces along the baseboard, then cross-checking the numbers on the plans. The math didn't add up. There was a void, a missing space, wedged between the study and the main hallway. The wall in question was nearly 2 feet thicker on one side than on the other, as if concealing a hidden cavity. The more Evelyn traced the outlines with her pencil, the more certain she became. The house held a secret room. With her heart pounding, she phoned Joe. He arrived within the hour, toolbox slung over his shoulder, his eyes shining with curiosity and the thrill of a proper mystery. Silver watched them both through the window, nostrils flaring, hoofing at the earth. Together, Evelyn and Joe examined the wall, tapping and pressing along the crack until they found a hollow thump beneath the plaster. The air in the study grew cold, every noise magnified. Joe ran his fingers along the seam, muttering about old construction tricks and the lengths people would go to hide things they didn't want found. He fetched a small crowbar, hesitated only a moment, and began to chip away at the plaster. The work was slow and nerve-wracking. Each chip fell with a dry, echoing sound. Beneath the crumbling surface, they found layers of old brick, stained and brittle with age. Evelyn's hands shook as she helped clear away the debris, the physical labor grounding her in the midst of mounting suspense. Silver's agitation grew as the opening widened, her breath visible in the cold air pouring from the wall, her tail swishing as if she sensed the gravity of the moment. As dusk thickened outside, Joe finally broke through a final layer of brick. The sudden rush of stale, cool air into the room sent goosebumps across Evelyn's skin. She shined a flashlight into the dark, narrow space revealed behind the wall. Dust danced in the beam, swirling over a room untouched for generations. Inside, they could just make out the shapes of stacked trunks, old suitcases, and a battered wooden chest. Shelves lined with yellowed papers and tarnished objects glimmered at the edges of the light. In the center of the floor sat a heavy, leather-bound book, its cover etched with initials dulled by time. For a long moment, neither Evelyn nor Joe spoke. They simply stared into the gloom, the reality of their discovery settling in like the dust upon the trunks. The hidden room was small, but meticulously sealed, every surface layered with secrets, some personal, some perhaps tied to the whispers that had haunted the house and its previous owners for decades. Silver let out a long, low whicker that broke the spell. Evelyn squeezed through the opening first, the smell of old paper and leather thick and oddly comforting. Her flashlight played over stacks of coins, boxes of bonds with faded government stamps, and the diary at the center, so obviously important that Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for it. The air seemed to shift in that moment, as if the entire house was releasing a secret it had carried far too long. Joe, leaning through the gap, let out a low whistle, marveling at the fortune and the forgotten stories lying dormant in the dark. As night drew in and shadows crept across the study, Evelyn sensed a change. The house, for all its creaks and chills, felt less like an enemy and more like an ally, one that had been waiting for the right person to listen, to dig deeper, to trust instinct as much as reason. And Silver, standing at the window in the last orange light of evening, finally seemed at peace, her role as guardian and guide fulfilled, if only for tonight. The air in the hidden room was heavy and dry, thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and the faint tang of history long sealed away. Evelyn stepped carefully inside, her flashlight beam dancing across the chaos of forgotten possessions. Joe waited by the opening, his silhouette framing the spill of pale hallway light that seemed reluctant to follow her deeper into the secret chamber. Silver lingered at the study window, calm now, her watchful gaze settling on her owner as if satisfied that the final layer of mystery was at last being peeled away. Evelyn's boots crunched across scattered bits of plaster and broken brick. She reached for the nearest trunk, its leather straps brittle with age, and carefully pried it open. A cascade of metal glinted under the dust. Coins, dozens upon dozens, their faces stamped with years from the depths of the Great Depression. The coins had been packed tight, as if their owner believed they might one day rescue him from ruin. Beside them were stacks of bonds, some crisp and yellowed, others curling at the edges, each one a relic from an era when fortunes could vanish overnight with the wrong signature or the right betrayal. At the heart of it all sat the diary, its thick leather cover scarred and softened by countless hands. The initials C.W. were stamped faintly on the front. Charles Whitaker. Evelyn's hands shook as she brushed away a layer of dust and flipped open the first page. The script inside was neat, measured. The words pressed hard into the paper, as if the writer was desperate to be heard even decades after he was gone. She sat cross-legged on the floor and began to read, lost in the story of a man whose fate had been twisted by the shadows of greed and betrayal. Charles Whitaker, once a respected railroad engineer, had been accused of theft by the very family that built Alder Ridge's legacy. The diary's pages were stained with anger, shame, and a bitter clarity. Whitaker wrote about the stolen bonds, the backroom deals, and the rumors that spread like wildfire through the small town. He chronicled how, as his reputation crumbled, he watched old friends turn away and his family's name erased from the records of Alder Ridge. Whitaker's account was raw, sometimes veering into confession, sometimes into desperate hope. There were lists of dates and sums, names carefully recorded, letters never sent. His pain felt familiar to Evelyn, echoing the wounds she herself had carried. Wounds left by accusation, loss, and the slow, corrosive effect of being misunderstood. She paused often, overwhelmed by the parallels, the sense of exile, the longing for justice, the stubborn hope that the truth might one day come to light. Joe eventually joined her inside, careful not to disturb the layers of memory piled up around them. He sifted through the other trunks, pulling out rusted railroad tools, a pair of cracked spectacles, and a bundle of photographs tied with string. The faces in the photographs were serious, hopeful, unaware of the scandal that would swallow their legacy. Joe shook his head, muttering under his breath about history repeating itself in every small town he'd ever known. As dusk crept over Alder Ridge, Evelyn kept reading, piecing together the fractured story of Charles Whitaker. One passage caught her attention. Whitaker's final entry, written in a hurried hand, described how he'd sealed away the evidence of his innocence and left it for someone who understands what it is to lose everything, yet keep faith. The words struck Evelyn like a bell ringing in a deserted station, summoning the living to bear witness for the dead. She set the diary aside, letting its weight settle into her lap. All around her, the hidden room's treasures glimmered in the failing light, testaments to a life ruined and a family's honor sacrificed for another's gain. The revelation was not just about the money or the old bonds. It was about the power of truth, long denied, to finally break through the silence. Evelyn stood, stretching cramped muscles, and stepped out into the study. The air felt fresher, lighter, as if a pressure had lifted from the house itself. Silver met her at the door, muzzle brushing her shoulder, eyes gentle and unafraid. Evelyn leaned against the horse, feeling gratitude for the loyalty that had led her here, and the courage that would be needed for what came next. The discovery in the hidden room was more than a legacy. It was an unfinished reckoning, waiting for someone to listen and tell the world what really happened. And in that moment, Evelyn knew her journey wasn't just about healing her own wounds. It was about giving voice to the silenced, honoring both the lost and the survivors. The weight of Alder Ridge's secrets now rested with her and Silver, and she was no longer afraid to carry it. Night fell in a hush, the house standing quiet at last, no longer haunted, but holding its breath for the truth to emerge. Word has a way of seeping out in small towns, slipping through cracks and whispered over fences. No matter how closely, a secret is guarded. By the time the sun rose over Alder Ridge the next day, the news had already begun to swirl. Someone had seen Joe's truck in the driveway long after dark, and rumors quickly transformed his late-night visit into something scandalous. By noon, stories of Evelyn's discovery in the old Victorian house darted through the diner and hardware store, twisting and growing with every telling. At first, Evelyn tried to ignore the glances and lowered voices as she went about her day. But when she stopped by the feed store, the air was charged with unspoken questions. A pair of older women at the counter fell silent as she entered, watching her with a mix of suspicion and hungry curiosity. Children circled on their bikes near her gate, hoping to glimpse the fortune that was now the talk of the town. Even Joe, ever the steady presence, seemed uneasy, his phone buzzing with calls from neighbors and the local paper. The Whitaker family, whose name still adorned the faded sign above the Old Town Bank, reacted quickly. Their descendants, well-heeled, prominent in local politics and commerce, arrived at Evelyn's doorstep, bristling with the entitlement of those who believed Alder Ridge belonged to them. They demanded answers, some polite and others not, about what she'd found in the walls and whether she had the right to keep it. Their lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with an impatient manner, pressed for details, hinting at ownership, history, and the supposed debts owed to their bloodline. At the same time, the Alder Ridge Historical Society staked their claim, eager to preserve whatever treasures and stories had come to light. For years, they'd lobbied to turn the Parker House into a museum, a living testament to the town's past. Now, with Charles Whitaker's diary and the Depression-era fortune in Evelyn's hands, they saw their chance to cement their legacy. Their chairman arrived with a list of requests, careful, insistent, and cloaked in the language of public good. Pressure mounted from every direction. Evelyn found herself pulled into meetings at the town hall, facing council members and heated debates. Some saw her as a trespasser who'd stumbled into riches she had no right to claim. Others regarded her as a hero, a steward of hidden truth, the woman brave enough to dig up the past that so many had tried to forget. The lines drawn between the Whitaker descendants and the Historical Society quickly became trenches, with townsfolk taking sides, old rivalries reignited, and bitter feuds resurfacing that had slumbered for decades. The strain began to wear at Evelyn. Each demand, each knock at her door, felt like a challenge to her place in Alder Ridge. She tried to remain impartial, to explain what she'd found and why she believed it mattered. But suspicion and old wounds hung over every conversation, and soon her nights were troubled by restless dreams. The house, once a haven from the world, grew noisy and crowded, its silence replaced by the constant murmur of voices and opinions that refused to be quieted. Silver, through it all, became her anchor. The Mustang seemed to sense the turmoil swirling through the property. She stood guard at the edge of the orchard, greeting visitors with a cool stare and protecting Evelyn with an unwavering presence. On especially tense days, Evelyn found peace in the barn, brushing Silver's coat, breathing in the earthy scent of hay and horse, letting the simple rhythm of care return her to herself. But stress left its mark. The pressure reawakened old grief, memories of standing alone on the fire line, of accusations and suspicion, of fighting to prove her worth after losing so much. Doubt crept back into her thoughts. Had she done the right thing by uncovering the hidden room? Should she have left the past buried and let Alder Ridge cling to its comfortable myths? The tension in town reached a breaking point when a heated meeting at the Historical Society devolved into shouting. The Whitaker lawyer threatened legal action, claiming the contents of the hidden room by right of family inheritance. The chairman argued for public access, insisting the fortune belonged to the people. Tempers flared, alliances shifted, and for the first time since arriving in Alder Ridge, Evelyn considered packing up and leaving, retreating to another small town, another attempt at peace. Yet each time she wavered, Silver seemed to remind her of their journey. The Mustang's loyalty, her insistence on standing firm, gave Evelyn the strength to endure the scrutiny and doubt. In the quiet moments before dawn, she reread Charles Whitaker's diary, tracing the pain and hope woven through every page. The old railroad man's story was not just about loss, but about the power of truth to outlast even the fiercest storms. The community watched her, waiting to see what she would do next. And as the days grew shorter and the tension threatened to tear the town apart, Evelyn realized that her choices might not only decide the fate of the hidden fortune, but whether Alder Ridge could ever truly heal from its buried wounds. As autumn crept over Alder Ridge, golden leaves drifted through the orchard, covering the muddy ground where Silver once pawed at hidden streams. The air was brisk, the sky a steady slate gray, and Evelyn felt the weight of the season settle on her shoulders. The house, quiet again after weeks of turmoil, held its breath along with her, waiting for the decision that would shape its future and the fate of everyone in town. The discovery of the hidden room and its riches had brought more trouble than comfort. Each day, letters arrived, legal threats from the Whitaker family, formal requests from the Historical Society, appeals from townsfolk who saw in her windfall the answer to their private hopes. Evelyn felt pulled in every direction, each voice whispering a different story about what she owed, to whom, and why. In the evenings, she'd sit by the kitchen window, the diary of Charles Whitaker open in her lap, tracing the careful script with her finger. The pages had grown soft with use, each line alive with the urgency of a man desperate to clear his name. She saw in Whitaker's writing the slow heartbreak of betrayal, the price of silence, and the corrosive power of secrets kept too long. His last entries, written with a trembling hand, spoke of hope lost and a legacy left for someone honest enough to reveal the truth, no matter the cost. Yet as Evelyn turned each page, temptation gnawed at her resolve. For years she'd scraped by, losing nearly everything to fire and bad luck. She knew what it was to fear the future, to wish for a stroke of fortune that would finally lift the burden. The money and bonds in that secret room could change everything. She could pay off debts, repair the house, build a future for herself and Silver. After so much loss, wasn't she entitled to a little security? The thought pressed on her late at night, louder than the wind or the restless whispering of the past. The town seemed to sense her hesitation. Rumors shifted from admiration to suspicion. Some said Evelyn planned to run off with the fortune, that she was just another outsider looking to bleed Alder Ridge dry. Others watched her with hope, praying she'd be the one to break the town's cycle of greed and silence. The old feuds grew sharper, threatening to splinter the fragile peace the community had managed to hold. Haunted by these doubts, Evelyn retreated to the barn, seeking Silver's quiet companionship. The Mustang nuzzled her shoulder, gentle and steadfast. Evelyn pressed her forehead to Silver's neck, drawing strength from the mare's solid presence. In that stillness, she thought about what it meant to belong somewhere, not just to take what one could, but to care for a place and its people, even when they made it hard. A storm swept through the valley one night, rain pelting the roof and wind rattling the windows. The power flickered and failed, plunging the house into darkness. Evelyn lit a lantern and sat alone in the study, the diary open in her hands, the sound of her own breath loud in the hush. She read Whitaker's last plea: "Let truth come to light. Do not let my suffering be for nothing. The past deserves witness, and the living deserve release." Those words echoed in Evelyn's mind as the storm raged. She understood, at last, that keeping the fortune would only deepen the wounds that had festered for generations. She could not live with the guilt, nor with the legacy of taking what was never truly hers. Whitaker's suffering had not been for her enrichment. It was a warning against the corrosive power of secrets, the danger of letting fear or bitterness decide what was right. By dawn, Evelyn's decision was made. Exhausted but clear-eyed, she called the chairman of the Historical Society and asked to meet. She shared the contents of the diary, the coins, and the bonds, explaining everything she had found and how she had come to her decision. She proposed a public reckoning, a meeting where Whitaker's story would be told, and the community, not any one family or faction, would decide what to do with the fortune. The news sent another ripple of shock through Alder Ridge. Some were outraged, others relieved, but most sensed the gravity of the moment. For the first time, the story of the town and its hidden sins was not being buried, but brought into the open. Evelyn's courage forced everyone to reckon with the choices they'd made, and the future they hoped to build. Silver stood with her as she faced the gathering storm, the Mustang's calm a steady anchor in the whirlwind of change. For the first time since arriving in Alder Ridge, Evelyn felt the faintest glimmer of belonging, the sense that she was not just passing through, but part of the place's healing. She had chosen the harder path, and as the town gathered to hear the truth, she knew she would face whatever came next with her head high and Silver by her side. The day of the public meeting dawned gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over Alder Ridge as if the weather itself understood the gravity of what was to come. All week, tension had built in the town like pressure behind a dam, every conversation and glance laced with anticipation or dread. People gathered in the old community hall, a place where generations had celebrated, grieved, and more often than not, clung to secrets. This morning, the air buzzed with a wary hope, as if everyone sensed the possibility for something different. Evelyn stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands trembling slightly, Silver's warm breath at her back. The Mustang, freshly brushed and standing taller than usual, had become a fixture in the town's imagination, a symbol of all that was wild, unbroken, and honest. Some folks smiled at the horse in greeting, others avoided her eyes, uncertain how to regard this animal who had, in her way, unearthed a century's worth of shame. The Historical Society's chairman called the meeting to order, voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. The Whitaker descendants were seated at the front, their faces a careful mask of pride and unease. The rest of Alder Ridge filled the folding chairs and lined the walls, farmers in boots and bankers in polished shoes, teenagers in faded jackets, and elders clutching memories of the town's early days. Joe was there, his battered cap in his lap, a quiet anchor in the swirl of opinions. He nodded to Evelyn, his gaze steady and reassuring. For a moment, she thought of how all this might never have happened if she'd simply ignored the cracks, the noises, the instincts of a frightened Mustang. Yet now, the whole community was here, because she'd chosen to dig deeper, not just into the house, but into the stories that had shaped them all. The chairman spoke first, laying out the facts: the discovery of the hidden room, the Depression-era coins, the railroad bonds, and most importantly, Charles Whitaker's diary. Then, with Evelyn's consent, A member of the society began to read aloud from the diary's most crucial passages. The voice was steady and solemn, filling the hall with the anguish and hope of a man wronged by those he trusted. Whitaker's words struck like thunder. He wrote of betrayal by the town's founding family, of lies that had cost him his reputation and future. His entries described the theft and the false accusations, the way neighbors turned their backs, and how he had hidden away proof of his innocence in a final act of faith. The audience was silent except for the occasional gasp or murmured prayer. Even the most hardened doubters found themselves moved by the diary's raw, plain-spoken truth. As the final words echoed, a quiet spread through the room. The Whitaker family's descendants looked pale, some staring at the floor, others blinking back tears. What had once been a battle for inheritance became, in that moment, something else entirely. A reckoning not only with the past, but with the values that would shape Alder Ridge's future. It was then Evelyn stood, feeling the gaze of the room upon her. She spoke quietly, but her voice carried. She told them about following Silver's instincts, about the weight of the secret room and the legacy it contained. She explained why she had refused to keep the fortune, and why she believed Whitaker's final wish was for truth and healing, not further division. There were a few moments of uncertainty. The chairman proposed that the fortune be turned into a public trust, a fund to support the preservation of local history, as well as relief for families affected by the wildfires that had, in recent years, threatened the valley. The idea sparked murmurs, but then one by one people nodded. Even the Whitaker descendants, faces drawn, finally agreed that honoring Charles Whitaker's name meant lifting the whole community, not just their own. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as tension gave way to relief. In those few moments, something shifted. Generations-old feuds softened, old friends shook hands, and neighbors who'd kept to themselves for years leaned in to share a smile or a story. The fortune, once the source of secrecy and pain, became a seed for reconciliation, the start of a new chapter for Alder Ridge. Evelyn, exhausted but buoyed by gratitude, was embraced by people who had once eyed her with suspicion. They called her brave, honest, necessary. The local paper wanted her picture. The Historical Society asked her to help curate an exhibit about the Whitaker story. Children, wide-eyed, clamored to pet Silver, who accepted their praise with the dignified patience of a true hero. For the first time since her arrival, Evelyn felt the bruised edges of her spirit begin to heal. As the meeting broke up, townsfolk gathered in clusters outside, talking in low, hopeful tones. The old house, which had once been a place of suspicion and sorrow, was now a symbol of new beginnings. The Mustang who had unearthed its secret was led through the crowd, adorned with a garland of autumn leaves, celebrated as the guardian who helped bring the truth to light. That evening, as the town basked in a rare sense of unity, Evelyn stood on the porch with Silver at her side. She watched neighbors wave as they passed, felt the warmth of belonging, and knew that at last, she and her Mustang had found a place not just to survive, but to flourish. The winds of autumn soon gave way to the first gentle promise of winter, and with them, Alder Ridge began to transform. The old Parker house, once weighed down by secrets and suspicion, became a hive of purposeful activity. Craftsmen and townsfolk, volunteers and tradespeople streamed in and out with ladders, buckets of paint, and rolls of insulation. Laughter rang out where silence once ruled. Sunlight streamed through windows cleared of dust, illuminating the deep wood grain of floors Evelyn had scrubbed with her own hands. It was more than repair. It was renewal. The house's battered foundation, once threatened by the hidden stream, was reinforced and drained, the floors leveled, the sagging porch brought upright. Each board hammered, each wall restored. Felt like a small act of healing for Evelyn and the town. People came bearing stories along with their tools, tales of their own families, recollections of dances and disasters in the old community hall, even whispered memories of Charles Whitaker, whose name was now spoken with respect and even affection. Evelyn became a fixture in town. She was asked to serve as steward of the estate, the official caretaker and guide for visitors interested in Alder Ridge's past. She accepted, humbled, realizing she was no longer the outsider whispered about behind closed doors. Her mornings began early, tending the orchard, greeting the work crews, and always spending a quiet hour with Silver, whose steady presence had been her anchor through so much uncertainty. Silver was celebrated as much as any person. Her story recounted in newspapers, school projects, and even in a local mural, painted on the side of the town library, showing the Mustang beneath the apple trees, head high and mane flying, with Evelyn beside her. Children brought carrots and apples, giggling as Silver nuzzled their palms, the Mustang's eyes bright and wise. The public fund, built from the fortune found in the secret room, quickly became a lifeline for Alder Ridge. It paid for museum displays, supported the Historical Society, and just as importantly, provided relief for those affected by recent wildfires. The memory of destruction was never far from anyone's mind, but now it was met with resilience and a spirit of generosity. The people of Alder Ridge, united by the truth of their own past, faced the future together rather than apart. Evelyn's own wounds began to mend in the quiet way of things tended carefully over time. She still had moments when grief crept in, ghosts of the fire that took her old life, of loneliness on the road, of all she'd lost. But in the rhythm of her new responsibilities, she found peace. She no longer avoided her reflection, or the scarred skin on her arms, or the sense of always waiting for the next disaster. She learned to let the past rest where it belonged, not hidden, but honored. As winter deepened, the estate became a place of gathering. The old barn, once a lonely refuge, filled with warmth and laughter as neighbors gathered for potlucks, music, and the occasional impromptu dance. On quiet evenings, Evelyn would slip outside, stand in the crisp air beside Silver, and look out over the town twinkling with lights. She marveled at how the place that once felt like exile had become her home. One morning, as frost sparkled on the grass, Evelyn received a letter from the State Historical Commission. Alder Ridge and the Parker estate would be recognized for their role in preserving local history. The honor was unexpected, but Evelyn knew it belonged not to her alone, but to every person and every stubborn, loyal Mustang who had chosen honesty over silence and healing over pride. She reflected on her journey, the fear and doubt that had once defined her, and the quiet courage it took to trust in Silver's instincts and her own. She thought of Charles Whitaker, whose story had nearly been lost to time, and felt gratitude for the chance to bear witness, to bring light to old wounds, and to see the town and herself begin again. On the night the museum opened in the old house, the whole town gathered under a cold, star-strewn sky. Lanterns hung from the porch and the orchard's trees, casting warm circles of gold on the frosted ground. Inside, the rooms were alive with voices, children tracing the lines of the secret room, elders sharing memories, visitors from neighboring towns marveling at the story of Alder Ridge's redemption. In a place where shame had once flourished in silence, pride now bloomed openly. Evelyn stood at the edge of the celebration, Silver by her side, and watched the townspeople, her neighbors, her friends, move through the house she had come to love. The air was filled with laughter and gratitude, the kind that only comes when people choose to face their truth together. As the evening faded, Evelyn walked into the orchard. Silver followed, breath steaming in the cold air. The moon hung low, casting silver light on the dew-soaked grass. Evelyn ran a hand down Silver's neck, and for a long moment, there was no need for words. Everything she needed was here: hope, healing, belonging, and the promise of a new beginning. Alder Ridge, once fractured by secrets and fear, had come together. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Evelyn understood what it truly meant to be home.